In our club, there is a guy called Chris. Last year, he seemed to have a serious back problem, and at one stage, his doctor recommended that he stop running altogether. All the rumors go around inside the club. Oh, have you heard about Chris? Oh, he's got a back problem. I don't think we're going to see him again. That was probably the point where he figured he had nothing to lose from there, and he started carefully to reintroduce himself back to running, along with some exercises. Lo and behold, he's now back to almost his previous performance. He's sort of just back in the club, doing his running. And I would bet if you guys are in clubs or you do running in groups, many of you have come across an example like this, where, oh, he thought he would never run again, and now he or she's like back running. And don't you ever wonder, like, how come? Well, today we are going to get maybe a few explanations as to why this might be possible and why this might happen. Hi, and welcome to the Running Reviews podcast, where we review books written for runners, about runners, and by runners to help you decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We also hope that listening to us chat about running can help keep you motivated about your own running, or maybe just inspire you to try something new. My name's Alan, and with my co-host Liz, we're going to talk today with co-author Ryan Whitehead about his book, Pain and Performance. The other co-author being Matt Fitzgerald, who isn't with us today. Ryan's going to carry the baton for both.
So a little bit about the book. Pain and Performance is a book that aims to explain how pain is a normal human experience and not something that we need to try and get rid of. Well, at least not completely. Pain also doesn't always mean tissue damage, as we're mostly taught to believe. Author Ryan Whitehead has been helping athletes in his gym. His gym's called Paragon Athletics, for many years using the biopsychosocial model of pain. In this book, he shares his own experience with pain, what the research says about pain, what the biopsychosocial model of pain is, Paragon's training as treatment model, and how you can use it to work your way through your own non-traumatic injuries. The book is divided into 11 chapters and has personal stories and case studies throughout. A little bit about the authors. So Ryan Whitehead is a personal trainer, elite climber, and the founder of Paragon Athletics, a gym that empowers athletes with sport-specific strength and conditioning to complement their performance goals. His passion for working with athletes and investigating the nature of biomechanics and human performance is the basis of Paragon's innovative training as treatment program. Paragon has become a destination for both novice and elite athletes who find themselves sidelined by chronic pain or injury. As a specialist in pain science and physiology, Ryan uses his experience as a certified strength and conditioning specialist to help his clients avoid surgery, reduce or eliminate pain, and return to their sport with more resilience. And that's exactly what we're going to talk to him about today. But before we do, a little bit about Matt Fitzgerald. So Matt couldn't be here today, but most of you are familiar with Matt. Matt Fitzgerald is an acclaimed endurance sports coach, nutritionist, author, and co-founder of 80/20 Endurance. His many books include The Endurance Diet, 80/20 Running, and How Bad Do You Want It? Matt's writing also appears regularly in magazines and on websites such as Women's Running and OutsideOnline.com. His online training plans have helped thousands of athletes of all experience and ability levels achieve their goals. Certified by the International Society of Sports Nutrition, Matt has consulted for numerous sports nutrition companies, and he's the creator of the Diet Quality Score smartphone app. A lifelong athlete, he speaks frequently at events throughout the United States and internationally. So we can't have Matt, but welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So I guess we'll start off with just a general question. How did you decide to write the book, and how did you get to know Matt, and why did you decide to write the book with Matt?
This opportunity came up when Matt was at a talk that I've been giving for quite a few years. The title of this talk is the same as the book, Pain and Performance. During this talk, quite a few of the things that I mentioned just kind of rang true with Matt, and it was all science-based. And as we know with Matt, he really enjoys sort of sifting through science. And everything I said just rang true with him, and he thought, if not other people know this, how don't I know this? And approached me afterward and said, maybe we should follow up with a talk about writing a book at some point. We kind of left it at that for the night. And then I circled back to him a few weeks later and said, kind of followed up and said, maybe we should start writing that book. And that's how it happened. And it's kind of just this message sort of took over my life because I saw such a need in the athletic community and outside of the athletic community. And so most of the things in my life went to the back burner because this became very important to me.
And how long ago was that? Like, how long ago did you have that conversation and then start writing?
That was 2019. We started writing just before the pandemic. And then I've been kind of banging this drum for quite a few years, probably 8 years on this.
Was Matt just educating himself, or was he there as
sorry.
As a subject? Because I know Matt's quite an injury-prone character. I think he used to describe himself, and maybe he doesn't now because of what we read and learn
Your magic
in the book. But he used to describe himself as injury-prone.
He did. He has changed the language around that a bit. And he was at Rob Carr's run camp.
Okay.
Most of us know who Rob is.
Yeah.
I work with Rob quite a lot. We've worked together through a lot of his injuries, and then also he does a lot of his strength training with us. Matt was at Rob's run camp, and one of the stops for one of the evenings was to come to our shop and listen to me talk.
Okay, so the book is quite a different view, I think, in terms of I don't know how to use the language really, in terms of a traditional view around you get a pen because you have an injury and that's all there is to it. So if you have a pen, you have to diagnose an injury. It's a totally not that approach. And we get that straight up in the book because the title of the first chapter is The Gift of Pain.
Mm-hmm.
Why would pain be a gift?
It's a very useful tool if you can learn to use it. We've pathologized this experience, and we've made it so that the elimination of pain in your life is more important than your health in many cases, which you can see across cultures.
Yeah, actually, I guess traditionally with pain-killing medicines, people go, okay, you have pain, take some medicine, get rid of the pain.
Mm-hmm.
There's no consideration of really lifestyle or whatever in that process.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, also, I think that when we have pain, we want to get rid of 100% of it, which is like kind of almost impossible.
No, pain's here to stay. So that's just how that goes. And like I said, we've kind of given it the command that we have. It's really an employee and not an employer. So, and once you kind of learn to use it, it is very useful. It's a subjective experience. So it's not something like when you mentioned diagnosis, I personally think most diagnoses, and I should put quotes around that, are fallacious. It's counterfactual by nature. So like if you say, oh, you have facet pain, that is literally just counterfactual by naming a specific structure and following it up by that's causing your pain, because the linear, like the causal model that we've used to diagnose is just not how pain works. It is not ever singular. It's never an isolated thing that is causing your pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you mean like, like, for example, you have pain in your knee, but, we all know that then like the IT band could be the cause of that. and it's not really anything is wrong with your knee. So is that kind of what you mean?
So I don't know if you've ever heard anybody say, "Oh, I have meniscal pain." Um,
Hmm.
Simply by calling it meniscal pain, that is a counterfactual statement. That is not how pain works. There's so many overlapping working pieces to it that that you can't narrow it down to a single structure like that.
Okay.
So we used to think that nociception. So nociceptors are they're free nerve endings that give information into the central nervous system. And at one point in the not too distant past, they were thought to be pain receptors. They're still referred to as pain receptors. You'll hear that very often from medical professionals. They are not pain receptors. They suggest that something possibly could be wrong, but that is a long ways from something being wrong sometimes. So they simply suggest, that something could be wrong to the central nervous system, to the brain, their working bits. So we built an entire system of care off of this idea. It's called the pathoanatomy model of care. That there was a 1-to-1 ratio between damage and pain. So if you could just simply find the damage, then you could explain the pain. But it's not nearly that clear cut, not even close.
Yeah, the fascinating thing for me in the book is when I read this, you quoted a study where they looked at several hundred athletes' knees for meniscus damage, and they found like the vast percentage of endurance athletes have damage to their meniscus, but they're not incurring any pain.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see how the trap could be. Okay, now I've got a pain. It seems to be coming from my knee. I better go and get an MRI. You get an MRI, they say, well, there's damage in your meniscus. Duh. Now you've got a
Yeah.
mental picture in your head that
Yep.
I have this pain because my meniscus is damaged, and now I'm injured. I can't do anything because this meniscus will have to be fixed before my pain can go away and I can run again. And now you're in a trap. When in fact the meniscus, it's highly likely that based on the study that the meniscus damage was there well before you had the pain.
Exactly. So it's a classic post hoc fallacy. So
Yeah.
we just sadly built a system of care around it. And it's those changes can happen. I've cited this study so many times that they looked at a group of female volleyball players with an average age of 18. I think it was 97 was the data set, 97 players, and 62.2% of them, if I'm not mistaken, had disc changes, degenerative disc changes at the age of 18.
That's in their backs. What are you
Wow.
saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So if but they were all asymptomatic. But if one of those girls had a painful a pain experience that lasted, 6 months or so, or a few months, and then went to get imaging to explain why their back hurt, then they would say, oh, it's these degenerative discs that you have. That's why your back hurts. But that's fallacious by nature.
But something's caused their back to hurt. So
Yeah, causal. So it's just not linear causation.
okay, it's holistic. Is that what you're sort of saying?
Yeah. There's something called the human regularity theory of causation, and it has a criteria that has to be satisfied in order to meet causation. And with pain, there are just too many moving parts really to narrow it down. I mean, you can have like your familial history, you can have your beliefs, you can have your expectations, you can have your genetics. Like, sure, there are cases, when the bio part of your pain experience is a part of it. It's not like it doesn't matter at all, but it is definitely not causal. in quotations. It's hard, really, really hard because it's such a novel way to think about pain. I've found it really difficult for folks initially to get their head around it. Matt would write for quite a while after our conversations. We'd come back, have conversations about what he wrote, and then go that's not it yet, because he had kind of a hard time backing out of the old model of thinking.
Okay. Is that also why things like pain medications, they don't work the same for everybody? Like is it
Sure.
partly expectation and all the other stuff that plays into, I mean, for sure there's a theory that says like there's probably a genetic component to why pain medications don't work, but maybe it's it's not even that. Is that what you're saying? It could be.
Yeah, there's all those psychological influences also. It's really funny if you mention psychology with pain experience, people reflexively pull back, because of the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
But I hate to break it to all of us. Our psychology plays a role in our pain experience. Absolutely. And it's never just a physical experience. Yeah, it's really interesting because if you mention psychology and performance, everybody's like, "Yeah, I'm 100% in. I get it."
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you mention,
Yep.
yeah, that hey, I think some of these psychological factors might be contributing to a pain experience, then reflexively people are like, "It's not all in my head." I'm like, "Well, slow down. I know it's not all in your head, but it's not all in your body either."
Yeah. Yeah.
The extreme example of kind of proving that some of it's in your head, the extreme example is with amputees who
Hmm.
get
Phantom pain.
get random pain in the leg that they don't have.
Yeah, we've all heard those stories.
So that
Mm-hmm.
there's clearly nothing physical going on there. It can't.
Hmm.
It's impossible.
Yeah,
So you have to accept that there's some component.
I recently had a friend that had an appendectomy. He was on the U.S. climbing team a number of years ago, and he's not the average age for appendectomy, but he had an appendectomy recently. So the pain, it was funny because he just got kind of queasy. He got sick and thought something might be wrong. Kind of wrote it out through the night, and then the next day he thought, I think I should go to the hospital. So he went to the hospital. They removed his appendix, and it never got too bad, to be honest. And then a few weeks later, he went for a run, and during his run, he kind of felt a little weird. Got home, and he had the most profound pain experience he's ever had in his life. And he actually got back to the the ED, and was having a hard time even standing because of the amount of pain he was in. So they actually had to help him into the bed. He couldn't get there. He had to be driven there. And they couldn't find anything wrong. And the
Oh,
funny thing
wow.
was as soon as he got into the bed, and he
Mm.
said he felt the pinprick of the IV. And as soon as he felt that, without any medication, it was like too instant. He said it just went away. His pain just subsided. So it was the most pain he's ever
Wow.
been in his life, and then it just stopped.
And he didn't get any medication.
Right. And then when he was actually in danger, uh, a few weeks earlier, he felt queasy. He didn't actually ever have a lot of pain with his uh, appendicitis. So it can
Wow.
just get really fuzzy. So, but back to the amputee. Um, so because he had an experience prior to that, it set him up, I'm sure, for that experience.
Yeah. I guess maybe we can start from the beginning because you have quite an interesting background. You had interesting role models. I guess that maybe made you more susceptible to be open to the new idea of like pain tolerance, and like um treatment for those kinds of things. Your dad. So in the book, you actually mentioned that when you were a kid, there was like a permanent hospital bed in your living room, because he would injure himself that much. And so he needed to use it regularly. And he rarely went to the hospital, from what I understand. Is that right? Tell us about your dad.
My dad is a pretty unique human. He hitchhiked away from home at 13, which is in the book, uh, because his dad had him racing horses for money at an early age. So he could make money with my dad, he learned, and with his little brother also. So they would, he used them in every way he could. So my dad realized that he needed to probably leave the environment he was in, and it was going to be the best case scenario for him. So he just learned to make his way. The funny thing was, is he hitchhiked to Phoenix from a little town in Texas at 13, started racing, and then got hurt immediately. I don't think that's in the book. Um, oh yeah, it is. It is. We edited quite a lot, so I forget which pieces stayed in and which pieces came out. So he got hurt immediately, and was kind of in peril from there on. So I remember as a kid him leaving the hospital with a cast, but having a full race schedule the next day, so he just cut his cast off, so he could race the next
That
day.
was in the book. I remember that part. That section
Yeah.
made the cut because I mean, yeah, that's usually not recommended to cut your cast off when you leave the hospital. Yeah.
Yeah. No, wouldn't recommend it.
You grew up in an environment really where, pain was present, but not really,
Given much attention.
yeah, given much ownership of the situation.
It was just in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really kind of how, it's funny, my dad had a traumatic brain injury when he was about 72. Let's see, the last time I saw him before his accident, he was 72. We had a racehorse track on our property, and we were just visiting my parents, and I was watching him from a long ways off. I was watching him drive a tractor around our racetrack. I saw him jump off the tractor, run back to do something on the racetrack, run back to the tractor and climb on top of it. And you could tell it was just routine for him at 72 years old. So, and then he did have a brain injury after that. And he survived it, which is kind of amazing. But I remember saying to him in his hospital bed after he was in a coma for quite a while, but when he woke up, when I was like, "You are a tough little man," and he said, "I've never been tough, Ryan." And I thought, okay.
Because probably mentally he doesn't engage with pain in that way. It's not, I tolerate a lot of pain. It's just like pain's there and I'm kind of like doing my thing and it's in the background.
It was a genuine answer.
Yeah.
He honestly meant that.
So you ended up not riding horses. You played football in college.
High school.
And then in high school. Okay, in high school. And then you ended up kind of quitting that, and eventually you became a personal trainer that works with injured athletes. So
Yes.
I guess, first of all, how did you end up in personal training? And then how did you end up like working with injured athletes as opposed to just, getting athletes ready, in their optimal shape? Or maybe I guess you do a bit of both, but like, I think that people go to you as, it seems like throughout the book, there's a lot of examples of sort of last chancers that come and see you and they're like, just help me because the medical
I've tried everything. I'm desperate.
Yeah,
help me, Matt.
Everything.
Help me, Ryan.
Yep, that is the
something.
case. So I came into personal training. I've always loved athletics from a very early age, like anywhere from strongman to martial arts. I remember the first time I happened to catch, when television had like 4 channels. I happened to catch, yeah, I happened to catch the Kona Ironman one day on a Sunday, and I remember, and I was watching it thinking, what is this? And I watched Mark Allen finished.
Yeah.
And then I watched for the rest of the day as people crawled across that line, and it emotionally like moved me. I remember as a kid, I was like tearing up, like this is the same thing that I have whatever these people have is what I have. And so I recognize that drive just to challenge yourself in every way you know how. So, and that's actually how I ended up becoming a climber, because I was so bad at it when I initially started it, that I thought, okay, this is the most challenging thing I've ever tried. And so that was a bit of how I got stuck on it. And then it ended up sort of being a soul craft type thing for me. So, and then how I ended up working with injured athletes, I'm not really sure how that all came about. I became really obsessed with biomechanics because I didn't want anybody I worked with to be in therapy. So if they were in therapy, then clearly I had done something wrong. That was my mindset. So I thought, well, if I know everything about biomechanics, then I'll have all the same answers that some other therapist will have. So I went to the Fascia Congress, which is like a congress that gathers biannually just to go over research of connective tissue. I attended so many gait clinics from gait gurus, learned everything you could about, running mechanics and gait. And then, I'm a climber, so I wanted to know everything about the shoulder. So I just read everything I could read. And then I ended up starting to read about pain. That was where the veil really started falling, because I thought, oh, this does not line up with the biomechanics research at all. And so, in fact, once you look at the biomechanics research, you realize it has kind of exposed itself for a lack. So very often it's the biomechanics research that shows, oh, this does not contribute to your pain. Yeah, if that makes sense. So, and then honestly, pain has been one of my main inquiries for quite a few years at this point. So, and I see so many athletes that just get stuck in therapy and get stuck in the pain cycle and have such a hard time getting out of it because they are following a traditional explanation of why something hurts.
I mean, Matt, so I'm guessing you work with a lot of runners.
We do.
How did you get kind of into the running community? Because I know you in the book you mentioned football and you do mention climbing, and climbing seems to be like a big passion of yours. So I don't know, did you personally get into running at any point, or is it just like runners get injured a lot, so it so happens that they need a lot of therapy, and when they get through all the therapy, and they still have their injury, then they come to you? Is that kind of what happens?
Right. I do run. For me, running isn't where I push myself. Running, I've run I'm not like in Flagstaff. A marathon is like a 5K here.
Yes.
Like everybody.
Yeah. I run one of those every Saturday or every Sunday.
Actually, the Laurel, who works with us here, she's a co-owner of Paragon, and she'll routinely run across the Grand Canyon a couple times on the weekends, which is 40 something miles.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife is an ultra runner as well, and a climber. And then little old me, I just run to contemplate, and it's more of a quiet time for me. So yeah, it's not where I push myself, but I do love running. So, and then there's just so many runners in Flag.
Okay. So yeah, I guess that makes sense. Those are the athletes that are around, and they do get injured a lot. So they come to you.
I suppose before we go on to talk about this sort of this new or this different idea of pain and how we can use that and work with it, we should probably talk about red flags or obvious trauma, so that people are not listening to us saying, well, are you guys crazy?
Right.
Also, we don't want them to go home with a cast and then saw it off in their garage. So
or break both their legs and say, oh, I just need to push through. I'll reduce my training slightly tomorrow.
No.
There are some, I mean, you talk about pain that is sort of a certain type, and that there are traumatic issues which are red flags that clearly are damaging events, that you shouldn't ignore, or try to work with. You need to have treatment. If you break a bone, or
Yeah,
something like that.
those
Um,
are the things that a good clinician, like, they can help. If you're at a certain age and a certain gender and your nutrition is bad, then they know the right questions to ask, like for femoral neck, stress fracture, or something truly sinister like that.
okay.
uh, in the book, it's mentioned that only 4 to 7% of diagnostic tools have been shown to have clinical value. So,
Okay.
by and large, all the little tests that you do to test for what structure hurts, like I said, that's dang near impossible to do. Um, they don't do what they don't test specifically what they think they're testing most often. But those few tests or those few questions that are important, if that makes sense. So, like, if there's if you have a sign of like a promoter neuron disorder or something like that, then an educated person is going to know the question or the physical attributes, to know what to look for. Like if you're developing Parkinson's or
Yeah.
something along those lines, and you're having a hard time initiating gait, then that person knows to look for that.
Hmm.
The slippery bit is that they know that part, and then they're going to try to apply all the other part that really isn't as important. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Yes, it does if you've read the book, but I'm not sure if our listeners
I don't know if our listeners are gonna
grasp
make
that.
the connection. So I mean, I think like we'll probably go on to talk about the biopsychosocial model and training as treatment. But just before we go into that, like I guess Alan's question was more like, so if someone has some kind of injury, what are sort of the things where it's not negotiable that they should actually go seek medical advice, so like a doctor
Yeah,
or go to the
right.
hospital or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have numbness or wasting, there are those huge neurological red flags where you're like, oh, that is clearly something wrong. Um,
Okay.
then those are the times, and even incontinence, and it is time to go see a doctor. You have waited too long, probably. So,
Okay.
um, yeah, and honestly, if your nutrition is really not that great, and you've had a big spike in your training, and you suddenly have a pretty painful hip, um, then that might be time to have somebody take a look at you also. Because a lot of
Okay.
those bony injuries, that's sort of the recipe for those things, or if you're one of those really high miles people that you're running, you know 120 a week or something like that, then you'll need somebody to take a look at you for those cases too. There are those cases, when that's a medical condition. So, there medical diagnosis is a thing. That is a thing because you can use objective measures to diagnose these things, and that is important.
Hmm.
But diagnosis of pain is a different thing.
Okay, perfect. So that's a good distinction. So I guess let's start with what is the biopsychosocial model?
This is a model that was proposed, I think, all the way back in late 1960s, by a few folks. George Ingalls, the primary person that's associated with the biopsychosocial model. So many years ago, they were saying, "Hey, I think there's much more to pain than just tissue." Um, but that wasn't the route we took. So we took a very narrow view of what the cause of pain was and left out the psychosocial pieces of
Yeah.
pain experiences.
I think in the book you call that the structural model. the kind of
It
standard.
is.
You have a structure in your body that's damaged, you get a pain associated with that, and people have adopted that as being the be all and end all.
Yeah. Pathoanatomy is another term that's used.
So the biopsychosocial model, it doesn't necessarily ignore that piece, but
No.
you add a few other factors onto there. Yeah, I was just gonna say, what are some of the other things that if somebody's experiencing pain, what are the other things that can influence the severity or their experience with it?
You just factor in the complexity of being a dynamic system. You were not, we're even referred to as, like little mechanical things. People use the car as an analogy for us all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but
All the
that
time.
we're much more complex than a car. We're more like a universe. So I think if I'm right, I think we every 80 to 100 days, I think we make 33 trillion new cells, something like that. It's like an astronomical number. Like effectively every 80 to 100 days, you make a new you. So we are
Wow.
profoundly more complex than a car. So with the biopsychosocial model, you take in more of those contributing factors, not just the one lens to explain why somebody hurts, which is a lot of times um, worth more attention than the bio side.
I get that, but probably for clarity, it might be useful if you give us some examples. I mean, you quote a lot of examples of case studies and people that you've met and treated in the book. I think it'd be useful for our listeners to see how that works in practice. Like, are you able to sort of maybe, pick one or two of your favorite examples?
I was recently working with somebody that he's a runner, had pretty significant knee pain, and but he really hadn't been able to find anybody to help him. So he hadn't gone to get images, which I'm kind of glad about that. But he had, every other sort of diagnosis sort of thrown at him with, oh, it's your IT, or no, it's your plica, or no, it's meniscus, all these different structures around the knee, but the thing just wouldn't resolve. So when he ended up sitting down with me, a lot of times when I start a process with somebody, we'll sit down. I have the luxury of sitting and talking. I don't, see 15 people an hour. Get to sit and talk with them. A lot of times that will be our entire first session, is just getting to sit and talk and listen about what's going on in their life. That's what an intake form is for. But if you just sit and talk to somebody, you can get a lot more done. So, I have that luxury that I can sit and talk to somebody. Come to find out, when he was losing his job, and I think his entire family was sort of at stake. It was having a big effect on his marriage. And then now he can't run because his knees hurt. And then we know the more important something is to you, uh, then the more protective your nervous system can be of that activity. So it can actually keep you from running because it's so important to you. Does that make sense? So all of a sudden, he couldn't participate in this meaningful activity, and he was just getting more and more isolated and having a very hard time finding somebody to help. So I mean, obviously, like, I'm not a psychologist, um, but a, a big part of what I do is sitting and listening. Of course, I am a trainer, so we use exercises. And so I'll get a set of exercises. It's a collaborative process, meaning we kind of shop around, so to speak, for exercises he thought would be good for his knees. I give him, a selection. We just kind of keep working around, looking at different movements until we both are like, I think these are good for you. And usually I only ask people to do about 3 or 4 exercises. But then we also, as soon as we can, just bringing the attention to, hey, your job is at stake, your family's sort of on the line also because of this. You have a lot going on right now. So even just drawing a acknowledgement to that can be helpful. Just realizing, oh yeah, that actually might be contributing to why my knees hurt, which we don't do very often. We don't think, oh, my sleep is really disrupted. I'm losing my job. My marriage is on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be really contributing to why my knees hurt. We just don't do that. That's not how we've been
Mm-mm.
taught to think about knee pain. So, but even just shining a light on that for somebody that can go, that is exactly when my knee started hurting. It can help, and can bring some confidence, like, oh, there's a lot contributing to this, and I can acknowledge it, and monitor it, try to improve my sleep, those kinds of things. I'm definitely not a marriage counselor or anything like that, so I'm not going to speak to any of that. But I can at least bring light to it, and maybe say, maybe you should start working with somebody through these pieces too, off to the side. And then we can adjust your training. So we can give you these exercises. Maybe you could see somebody, also, to help through some of the more details of your marriage and work and those things. And we can adjust your training, but we'll keep you on the trail or on out running, doing what you love to do, you know?
So, actually, one of the things that you use the most is exercises in your treatment.
Yes.
Like, basically, that's the basis of all your treatment from what we read in the book. And you mentioned at one point that physical exercise actually produces an analgesic effect similar to that of medications that you would normally use to treat pain. And
Yep.
you have the example of a 73-year-old woman that had, I think she had a lot of back pain,
Mm-hmm.
if I remember correctly. And she started exercising with you and
Mm-hmm.
ended up almost like reverse aging. Reminds me of Alan a bit. He's reverse aging too, in terms of running performance.
Yeah. Yeah. We still work together. We started working together when she was 72 and she was scheduled for back surgery.
Mhm.
And then we started working together.
And what was her quality of life like back then? Like when she
You
was
know,
scheduled for surgery. So,
it was constricting. She loves hiking and camping, not necessarily, what you would say as an athlete, even though funny enough, 2 weeks ago, I heard her call herself an athlete and I thought, I love that. So,
that's amazing.
um, yeah. And so, her everything was shrinking down. Basically, she wasn't able to go and do the things that she loves to go and do. And we started working together, and her back, started to change, and so she ended up canceling her surgery. And now here we are, 11 years later.
She never had that surgery.
No, and she's stronger than she was then. She can. It was funny because I asked her to do a pull up, a couple weeks ago, and she was like, "I don't think I can do that." And I was like, "Man, I know full well you can do that." So, because yeah, she's a strong lady. So it's been really, really cool.
So for the people doing the math, like so 11 years, so she's like 83 now and she's doing
83.
pull-ups. And she's doing pull-ups?
Right. Yeah, she's
Let's hope for
strong.
us, yeah, Liz.
Yeah, isn't that great? So
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it's funny
amazing.
because the guy that comes in after her, is a big guy, and I always leave her weights out. And I'm like, this is what Ann used. You can, if you want to use it. So he's like, I
Ah,
see
that's
what you're
good.
doing here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting
Wow.
in your other example, your previous example that you gave of the guy. Um, you actually said, I heard you say it. You were glad that he hadn't had any imaging done. So
Mm.
you're actually, obviously I'm setting up the question here, but our listeners might be interested to hear you say that you were glad that he hadn't had any imaging done. But you actually have a chapter called the diagnosis trap.
Hmm.
So why would you be glad that somebody hasn't had any imaging done? And tell us about the diagnosis trap.
Yeah. If you're under the impression, that structure is is the thing that causes pain, and then you go to solve it with, surgery, but then that thing doesn't resolve, that's a problem. And then you end up, I have somebody right now that has had 6 knee surgeries. She's in her mid 30s and she's had 6 knee surgeries. She's still trying to find the thing that's causing the pain. And that's the stuff that breaks my heart. And she hasn't, I haven't worked with her actually. I know of her story. That's the thing that I want to interrupt. So when you get images and you're under the impression that structure is what's causing pain, and then it's affirmed with an image, they took a picture of it, a picture of your pain, and they can show it to you. This is what's doing it. That can have a very strong nocivic effect. Nocebo is the ugly kid brother of placebo. And it's just as powerful.
So this is pain for no reason, nocebo, versus placebo, which is cure for no reason.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a reason. We just don't know what it is.
Yes. For no apparent reason. Okay, so actually, in your model, you're better off not knowing where your pain is coming from specifically, because it's coming from a whole bunch of complicated circumstances.
In most cases, there are the occasional. In my 30 years of training people, I had one case where a lady had cancer in her hip, but that's 30 years of training people.
Okay.
And working, with people that have painful hips all the time. So there are those very outlying cases, but they are by far the few. With low back, less than 1% of low back pain is of any medical concern. That's a very small number.
Yeah, back pain is also one of those things that, I mean, everybody knows someone that has back pain and has been going to the doctor for years for it and still has back pain. I mean, everybody knows someone. Yeah, if they don't know, maybe multiple people.
They're bringing a very limited lens to a very complex problem. So I gave an example of one of my talks recently with, it'd be like going for a drive with my readers on, just all I can see was what's right in front of me and nothing out further. So it'd be a pretty dangerous proposition.
I guess let's first talk about what is training as treatment. Like what do you do? What's kind of like I don't know if you really have a step-by-step process, but in general, what do you do with your athletes to try and
essentially what I described a little while ago is starting by building a program with that person. And it's my hope, I'll give you another example. Over the holidays, somebody that I was working with, I've been working with him for about 2 years, about a year. He was in therapy for 2 years. And he was one of those back pain people that just could not find help. And he had looked everywhere to find help. And it was just getting worse, really. So we've worked together for about a year. He was doing amazingly well. He was back to doing his sports. He was back playing with his kids. He wasn't under the impression that he was damaging his back when he was playing with his kids. He was doing so well. Over the holidays, he had his first flare-up that he's had in a year. And he came in to see me when we got back. We were out of town. He came in to see me and he said his wife was out of town and I was out of town. He was like, he said, I was just standing in the kitchen and all of a sudden I went, dear God, that's it. That's the same pain I had when it all started. And he said he went down onto the kitchen floor and was like, here we go again. And he had gone to see so many medical professionals. But he said that he just got himself calmed down. Incidentally, he's a psychologist. And so he said he got himself calmed down and then started doing movements. And he said, I think this is fine. It's part of the process. It's an okay thing to happen. And sort of gently started reintroducing movement. And in 2 days, he was pretty much back to normal. But he said for 2 days, it really was a bad 2 days, but in my mind, I was like, that's success. Like he hasn't eliminated pain from his life, but he has everything that he needs for when those things happen. He wasn't biographically suspended, so to speak. Like that is the thing that
Mhm.
happens is people suspend their biography, and he had done that, and now he was back to having agency over the process.
So that's your goal, is basically to make everybody autonomous and being able to deal with their own pain experience.
Yeah, that's the idea. So that was we I don't know if you guys noticed that there's a bunch of videos attached at the back of the book.
Yeah, the QR code for any
Mhm.
book purchasers. There's a big bonus, a QR code which leads you to all of the a whole suite of exercises of different levels for different parts of the body.
Yep. And we're going to try to continue. Rob Krar was our videographer for that job. He did a pretty great job. So, but we're going to continue to add to those also as we go along. So yeah, but that's kind of our intention is, if you need somebody, if you need to reach out for some guidance, that's great. Like he did when I got back, he just wanted to check in. But we're hoping to empower athletes so that they have a good sense of agency and can handle things when they pop up, even when they're like really challenging. So like plantar fasciitis is one of those. Like plantar fasciitis is it's not, I shouldn't say plantar fasciitis because there's typically not any itis associated with it. It's plantar heel pain. Your heel hurts. It's the low back pain of the foot, basically. So it's one of those things
Yeah, it never goes away. Once it
can
takes
interrupt.
hold, it's just there forever.
Liz had one of those for about 2 years.
Oh my gosh, it was never ending, and nothing really did anything. So yeah, it was very frustrating.
Yeah.
And then one day it magically like started going away, and I have no idea why.
What? That's weird. Pain just changed like that?
Yeah,
No, it's not weird. That's
go.
what I'm saying.
it felt really weird at the time. Although like I was doing like basically like every athlete that wants to run, right? Like you need your feet to run, and when your feet hurt, it's kind of like one of the worst things you can have. And so I was doing everything.
Kitchen sink approach.
Yeah, it was like just throw everything at it. Massage. I did. I don't know. I took
Injections.
collagen supplements. Oh no, I didn't do that because that requires, prescriptions and things. And it's not really easy to, see a doctor here. We have like a public system, and so you wait for things for quite a long time. And let's say like my need to run doesn't really take priority over very much. So yeah, so it's but everything that I could do, like physio, I did massage, I took collagen supplements, I read a bunch of articles, I rolled my feet, and I bought all these contraptions with like I had the socks, the Strausen sock you can sleep with to keep your foot in like plantar flexion overnight, and I could never keep it the whole night. Like it would end up coming off maybe 2 hours later because I'd wake up and I'd just be kind of tired of the whole thing.
I was texting with a friend that's struggling with plantar fasciitis right now, or plantar heel pain. And I was asking him about his exercises, and he was like, "No, I haven't done them. I bought this thing that holds my foot and dorsiflexion during sleep." And I was like, maybe you should just try actually rubbing BS on it and see how that works. I was like, man, I just gave you good guidance through this whole thing. So I was pretty annoyed.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be really, really frustrating. Yeah. So I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Eventually, so initially I took rest, which didn't do anything. And eventually, I found out, okay, I can run like 30 minutes every other day. So I would run 30 minutes every other day. And that was better than zero running. So I was like, I should be happy with this, but I'm not. I want more running.
Yeah. But see, you intuited, like you eventually found it, right? And that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, someone told me, and I don't remember who it was. It might have been the physio. They told me that normally for plantar, it's common that total rest doesn't help. And
Yeah.
they said, so you do want to do some activity, but what you don't want is you don't want to go past the point where you have the sharp pain. So
Mhm.
like you kind of, so like when you warm up, initially
Mhm.
it's painful and then it kind of goes away and then eventually it comes back. And it's like when it comes back, that's when you should stop. So that was kind of like I can't even remember who told me that. So that's sort of what I started doing.
Really, what most therapies boil down to are graded exposure and directional preference. So if they're like, oh yeah, when I move my arm like this, that really hurts. So
Mm-hmm.
that's not a direction of preference. So for a little while, you just do it out here, and 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
later, you go, how about now? Oh yeah, that is a lot better. It's not really that you did really specific things. Just for a little while, you did something else and came back and did it. So, and then graded exposure is the other thing where you just gently start working back toward the thing, which is essentially what you did. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So.
also tried different shoes and things because I would have like shoes that would let me run a little bit longer without being aggravated than others. And eventually, like, I can wear any shoe now, but yeah, for a
Mhm.
while I would have like a couple pairs that I would rotate because the other pairs, like, I couldn't tolerate them so much. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah. So, but it's interesting. This stuff is in our face all the time. Uh, we just there's some dissonance there. There's some cognitive dissonance that we just kind of accept. Like how your heel just kind of started resolving one day. And you're like, oh well, it's getting better
Hmm.
without explanation. The pain, this significant pain you've been having, all of a sudden is just
Yeah.
going away.
For like two
And then
years, for two
right,
years.
and then and then sometimes you'll have a big bruise on yourself somewhere and somebody will say, where did that happen? And you're like, I have no idea when I did that, but you've obviously caused enough damage to cause bleeding under your skin,
Hmm.
but you
Hmm.
never even knew that when you did it. So we just reconcile this without even realizing that we're reconciling it all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but when somebody kind of puts it like right in front of you, you're like, oh yeah, that is what we do.
I think we're so ingrained in the old model that we have to keep reminding ourselves that there are other things at play through
Mhm.
examples. So it's good to hear the examples so we can keep reinforcing the other direction that we need to be thinking in and moving in. Um, I
Mhm.
think all of us runners intuitively like the idea of training as treatment. The sort of,
Yeah,
my leg's sore. Oh, well, I might cut my 10K run down to 9K today. That's
it's
kind of,
permission, huh?
yeah, that's kind
Yeah.
of how it works. It's not like
Because we never
if
want to
you ever get
stop.
to a point where you have to go, well, stop, like, no. And there are even memes in social
Hmm.
media about this.
Yeah.
Just doing crazy things to keep training. Um,
Yeah, I
so
really
that's
like the
good.
one. Okay, wait. Let's talk about memes. So I really like the meme. There's this one I there's this one I see on Instagram all the time, and it's this guy in a full body cast in a wheelchair, and he's got like everything is casted up. And so he looks at the doctor and he's like, so can I do my race on the weekend? I don't remember which race, like,
Yeah, can I
would
do
I
my
be able
long
to
run
run
on
the
Sunday?
marathon? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's good news. That's good news. Training as treatment, I think, is good news for all of us endurance runners. So you actually go further than that in the book in terms of giving people the sort of modality, the tools that they need to go through this training as treatment in a coherent, logical kind of way. That's really the exercise on the chapters on what sort of exercises should you select and how do you make
Hmm.
progression. So I'm
Hmm.
going to ask you about that. Before I ask you about that, you say before we get to exercises and progression of exercises, I give my people the pain talk.
Yeah.
This is kind of the
Uh,
before we get started, let me get you in the right mindset, I suppose. So what's the pain talk, Ryan? Give us the
the
pain
pain
talk.
talk is just the fuller explanation of why things hurt. Is
Okay.
all that is. Is uh, um, Yeah, basically what we've been talking about, taking in all those considerations, before you start this program, realize that if you've had a junky night's sleep, or if it's the holidays and you can't stand your family, um, then that might contribute to why your Achilles is a little more grumpy that week than the 2 weeks prior, those kinds of things. So, I try to always tell people, there's an introduction video to all those videos. And in that video, I try to make it clear, that if you overreach and it hurts, quite a bit the next day, don't try not to equate that to, oh, I've damaged more tissue now, which is really hard to do. It's because, it's just how we've been taught to think about why things hurt. Um, just to try to stay calm and go, okay, I overreached a bit, but that's okay. And stay consistent. Consistency, I always say, like, in this very complex equation, you are the unchanging variable. You're the thing that stays the same. So yeah.
So are psychologists easier to convince of the whole, if you don't like your family at Christmas and you have to spend lots of time with them, that's probably why your injury hurts more, or are they like everybody else and they kind of roll their eyes when you start telling them that their lifestyle is why they're hurting?
For the most part, I think yes, they're a little more receptive to that, those ideas. So
Okay.
I did have the one example in the book. I don't know if you recall that, the one example of the psychologist that I saw, that was a mountain biker, and his was fascinating because he was a psychologist, mountain biker. We saw each other because he had been trying to find a diagnosis for about 3 years. He wanted somebody to tell him why his back hurt. Um, and when we sat down, I said, was there anything else significant going on in your life when this started? And he said, no, not really that I can think of. And so I just kind of kept asking questions. And then he said, actually, I come to think of it, I was being investigated by the IRS at that time. And so we kept sitting there talking. He said, I was getting a divorce actually. And by the end
Oh
of the
my
hour, he had
goodness.
told me that he had contracted an STD. He was going through a divorce. He was being investigated by the IRS. There were like these enormous life things going on in it, and he was one of the only people that wasn't receptive to, hey, this might be contributing to this. So, which kind of, I was like, how do you not see this? Like, I think it was one of those times where it just didn't want to be seen.
Maybe he saw it later on his own. Sometimes like I think with these things there's like a timing factor as well. There are
Mhm.
times when you'd absolutely not be receptive to something like that. And then
Mhm.
like times when you are a little bit more open to the idea. And maybe that's why
I
we
heard
have
through
to
the
like
grapevine.
try everything else. Yeah, maybe that's why we have to go
Yeah,
through all of the other treatments. And when they don't work, now
yeah,
we're full receptive to anything that you say that is new because you've tried everything else.
right. You've exhausted every scan known to man. Uh, I did
Exactly.
hear through through the grapevine that he, about 2 years later, did start seeing somebody and realized, I heard anyways, that he did get help, and it was through a psychologist. So yeah, so it was, I just kind of planted the seed basically.
Yeah. You were just too early. He would have listened to
Mhm.
you 2 years later.
Yeah, these are the things that might be going on that might be contributory to your, whole mental state. Um, Often are not things that you can address specifically, but is just being aware of them useful in terms of
Yes.
dealing with pain?
Yeah, when you bring a completely different context to pain experience, I think it just brings down the whole level of worry in a lot of ways. When you realize, like, I am not damaged. Um, this just hurts because I'm going through a lot. Then I feel like it kind of de-threatens it a bit.
Because I notice in the book that sometimes you give people specific exercises that are kind of they contain a distraction component.
Yes.
There was one very neat one that I think I recall where you were teaching someone to stretch their hamstring, which hurt, and you got them to lie on their back, put their legs straight, and balance a book on their foot, or
Yeah. Yeah.
something like that. And they were concentrating on the balancing of the book, and
Yeah.
suddenly the hamstring stretch that they do normally standing up that was extremely painful, they were doing the same stretch. But
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
were focused on a balancing act, they weren't feeling the pain.
Yeah. So there's something called the expectancy effect, and it's a big part of pain. Like once you start to like, if you have plantar heel pain and you go put on your shoes and you're like, well, here we go, then there's this implicit bias that's built where you're kind of expecting for this thing to hurt. And one of the tools that you can use, it might fall under the heading of variety of exercises, like variety of terrain, variety of shoe, those kinds of things. But it's also you can interrupt that expectation with just novelty. So if somebody is doing something that's so novel and challenging that it sort of interrupts their expectation, it's called expectancy violation is the fancy term. Um, so if you use an expectancy violation, then a lot of times you can interrupt their that process, and that's a foot in the door, you know. So which with plantar heel pain, those kinds of things can be very useful. So like if you ask somebody to run backwards, that's a weird thing, you know,
Yeah.
and you don't have time to think, is my foot hurting really bad? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
You can do a lot of different things to get a foot in the door, so to speak.
Yeah, we
So
were out. Maybe it's not the same thing, but we were out jogging with the club um, last weekend, and I was describing something to somebody about internal and external stimuli and how to distract yourself. And I was saying I did an exercise because of a previous book we'd read. My knee was hurting, and I was focused on the outside of my right knee hurting. And every time I'm putting my foot down, it hurts. And I'm running
uh-huh.
along and my knee's hurting and I'm focused. And I was saying I was focused internally on my knee. And I said,
Uh-huh.
okay, just as an exercise, let's focus externally and let's do something complicated so that it takes up my attention. So I said, okay, I'm going to count the number of cars going down the freeway next to me towards me. And while I'm counting the number of cars coming towards me, I'm also going to, on my left-hand side, count the number of house lights and street lights. So I'm going 1, 2, 3 house lights, 2 cars, 3 cars, 5 house lights, 1 car. So I'm
Uh-huh.
doing an external distraction
Queuing.
exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
absolutely, my mind now is totally occupied because I'm doing 2 things at once externally. And I got to the end of the street and I said, I didn't feel my knee at all.
Yeah. Good
So,
move. Good move, Alan.
where's the pain message there? Where's the causality pain message there? It's kind of
Yeah. Yeah. No,
interesting
it's
stuff.
very smudgeable.
Yeah.
Very, very, very smudgeable. Yeah, there's all kinds of illusion things that they've done with pain. They're really interesting. I think I mentioned like a couple of them. I kind of hint at a couple of them with the iPad trick. I kind of use the iPad like a mirror. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of mirror therapy, but somebody that has a very painful hand,
Yeah.
they can put you can put your asymptomatic hand in front of or beside a mirror and kind of trick your brain into thinking that it's the other hand, and so you can bring down the sensitivity in the painful hand. And so there's all kinds of little brain tricks that you can do. People with significant pain in their necks, if you put VR goggles on them, you can lie to them. Basically, essentially, like if they get to 5 degrees and they're like, "Ooh, that's as far as I can go," put the VR goggles on them, and then you can visually suggest to them that they have not rotated their head as far as they have, but they can rotate their head, around 20 degrees
Hmm.
greater than they previously reported without pain.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, there are tons of illusions like that for pain that are pretty interesting. So,
And I think all these things prove that there's more at play than a causal model.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
and that cute
If
little
there are
idea we
people
had.
listening to our podcast who are going, I don't know, I'm not drinking Ryan's Kool-Aid. Um, what I'm trying to do is give
Yeah,
them examples of evidence why you should take this seriously
yeah.
and why you should
There's
be reading this
tons.
book and why you should be incorporating some of this stuff into your model,
Hmm.
into your mental model.
Hmm. Yeah, there's
And
tons of research now that supports this model. There's way more research that supports this model than what we're currently using, but it's a
Okay.
multi-billion dollar model that's in place right now. So it's
Yeah.
going to take a little time to turn the Titanic.
yeah. And let's say for people, that are listening that are sort of like, well, let me give this training as treatment a try because, maybe they're at a place where they, they're open to it because they've tried everything else. Then how would they get started? What would you suggest? If they haven't bought the book yet, let's say first step.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I guess first step is
by
buy the book.
yeah, buying the book, and I'm not trying to upsell anybody. In fact, I'm pretty bad at that. But this is such like I want to share this message with every athlete I can because I feel like it's important. So it'd be helpful to buy the book, but if you're like, I don't know about buying that book just yet, um, uh, there are plenty of other books out there. Actually, my friend Greg Lehman, who wrote the foreword, he has a blog that is full of. He's a PT um, and a chiro. I think he let his chiro license lapse, but and a spine researcher. So Greg has a blog that's full of good stuff, where he basically pokes holes in the pathoanatomy model. And like I said, he does biomechanics research. Like he's a PT. That's his thing. But he is saying exactly what I'm saying, and there are quite a few other clinicians out there saying exactly the same thing.
So maybe we can link that in the episode, his blog, and they could start there if they need some convincing. And then
Hmm. I'm just a simple little trainer. So, but Greg being a clinician and researcher, he has a lot more clout.
I would also say that you could get the book probably around chapter 7, chapter 8.
Mhm,
Movement is treatment, training is treatment, and
Hmm.
the movement drug chapters
mhm.
talk you
Yeah,
through a little bit about what your mentality should be and what your approach should be, and how to creep up on your injury without giving yourself very much risk, but being able to
yeah,
push it according to how you see it. And
yeah.
you could scan the QR code and get the exercises. So if you want knee exercises, you can get
A
those
bunch of them.
exercises. Yeah, they're all there, and you can try that and see where
Hmm.
that gets you. Or you can get in
Hmm.
touch with Paragon Athletics.
Actually, we should let Ryan give all that info. Like let's say that if somebody wanted to, do you work virtually with clients? Like, is that something because we're here in Canada. Well, Alan's not currently in Canada, but
Yeah,
would you be able to work with people virtually?
we do. At least half of my work is virtual nowadays, and
Okay.
it has been for quite a while. Even before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of work online. I've kind of earned the reputation, like it's sort of scattered out around the country, and even to tell you the truth, like I meet with some people abroad as well. So, which is sometimes difficult to line up time zones, but it works. We figure it out. But yeah, and you can schedule right through our website, which is easy to do at Paragon Athletics. It prompts you through scheduling. It's pretty straightforward, even if you kind of struggle with technology.
Okay. And if people want to buy the book, what's is there any place that you want to direct them or is Amazon fine?
Amazon's fine. I we like to kind of keep it local, so we try to send people to our little bookstore in town. Uh,
Mhm.
so if you happen to have, a bookstore in your town, you could go right through them if you wanted to, or any other conglomerate bookseller.
Just to put a full stop on our conversation a little bit, is there some specific message that you'd like to leave with endurance runners regarding, their pain? Are there some, take-home messages you just want to leave them with?
Yeah, one of the things, your story that you started with Chris, was that his name?
Yeah.
Those are the stories that break my heart. Like I hear people um, that stop climbing, stop running. One of our neighbors was an avid runner. I bumped into him walking the other day, and he said he has stopped running because it's damaging his knees. And I thought, dear Lord, what have we done to people? So yes, keep running is that would be my message. Go run with your friends. Go do those things. They are by far more healthy than stopping. There's even some evidence that, like, as runners, the discs get a little more robust because of the like compression
Mhm.
that
Sort of
they're.
exercising them.
Hmm.
Yep, yeah, they adapt. So, and our articular cartilage, like we've been told for so many years that it wears our knees out, and that's just not the case. So maybe in the most extreme examples, but even then, I don't think there's like hard, like good evidence for it. So yeah, keep running. That's my message.
Great message.
Yeah, that is a good message. I think most runners are going to be happy with that because, yeah,
So that's
that's
what
what
we
they
want to
want to
do
do.
anyway.
Confirm their bias.
Exactly.
So, should we give our summaries and then we can thank Ryan for his time?
Definitely. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So, Pain and Performance by Ryan Whitehead and Matt Fitzgerald. I think the book as you read it is sort of told. I don't know who wrote it. Probably Matt did a lot of the editing and writing, but the story is sort of through the eyes and from the experience of very much of Ryan. And what I would say is it sort of pushes against a lot of the previous thinking regarding pain and injury. We've mostly been brought up to think of cause and effect, where an injury is the cause and the pain is the effect. But there are examples when this is clearly not the case. Given that there are those examples, we have to accept that the model we have previously had is at least partially flawed, and there are many other factors to consider. Personally, I've never been a big advocate of rest as treatment. So training as treatment is like many runners. There's a lot to interest us in this book. As I said before, the story is sort of written in the person of Ryan. And there's a lot to admire about the way he's honest in the book and doesn't pretend to have all the answers or be the most qualified at everything. I think that the frankness and the candor makes it fun to read. And all in all, a fascinating read. And for people who are interested in this kind of stuff, you really need to get your head into this book.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add the book has a kind of a long buildup to finally get to the training as treatment method. You can always skip to the training as treatment method, but I think that you really should read the buildup because I think once you hear all the stories, they really convince you that, pain doesn't always mean tissue damage. So especially in, the kind of injuries that runners get, which are like mostly overuse.
Mhm.
So, even that the whole psychological aspect, I think that it's hard to accept when you don't read the whole buildup because I think you need all that evidence, even though it's people's experiences. And it's always fun to read those. As we've come to expect for Matt's books, he's got a little bit of Matt touch in there, because there are a lot of stories. I don't know if that was your influence as well, Ryan. Like they're your stories, but I know Matt's books tend to have a lot of those case studies, and this book is no different. It has a lot of case studies, which are fantastic. I really liked learning about Ryan's upbringing because his parents sounded a lot like mine. They didn't take me to the doctor very much. Like, I remember having earaches as a kid, and my mom would iron a towel and make me hold the warm towel to my ear. And for some reason, it made the pain better, but I don't even think that there's any legitimate reason to why that would be, because it was literally a tea towel. She would take a tea towel and she would just iron it to be warm, and I'd put it on my ear. And then I would have to, she never gave me, I never got Tylenol or antibiotics. Antibiotics I maybe had twice in my life, and once was as an adult. So that just goes to show you, I felt like Ryan had a very similar upbringing to mine.
If I was real
and-
bad, they'd get the vet.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, you'd have to be really bad. Yep. Because they made you sit at home. We learned about Ryan, and poor Ryan got injured, and his parents were going out. Not that they didn't love Ryan, by the way. They loved Ryan. But it was just their way. It was like, no, it hurts a little bit. It'll be fine in the morning, kind of thing. So it sounds a lot like mine. I enjoyed Ryan's perspective on pain and how to treat it. As a nurse, I took a course about treating cancer pain, and that was really complex with multiple layers. I felt like, although the reason and treatment for pain for non-traumatic injuries is different, it's also treated in layers with Ryan's method. So it kind of does make sense. And even in the medical field, I feel like pain has many layers in every context, because you go to a maternity ward and you'll have some women are screaming while they're giving birth, and other women are just like quietly pushing out their baby. So it's there's more to it. As a runner, I have no trouble buying into the training as treatment model, because many of the injuries I've had didn't respond to rest, and I think a lot of runners probably have the same experience. I think that the book is very beneficial for that. For runners who've been dealing with a pesky injury or who've been told they need surgery, I think this book is worth a read first. Maybe even reach out to Ryan to see if he can help you figure things out. So all in all, a great book. Lots of good information in there.
Thanks, guys.
So thanks once again for your time, Ryan. We really appreciate you coming on and giving us your insights. And
thank you so much.
Wish you every success with the book, but moreover, we wish that more and more athletes will adopt models which will keep them in their favorite exercise, their favorite sport, longer and with more enthusiasm.
More miles and smiles. That's what we're looking for, right?
Absolutely.
Yep, exactly. Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. Big thanks to the publisher 80/20 Publishing for providing review copies of this book, and big thank you to Ryan for spending time with us today. If you'd like to leave us feedback about how we can improve the podcast, or want to suggest a book that you'd like us to review in a future episode, you can leave us a comment on social media. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter we're reviews_running. You can also follow us on social media to find out when new episodes are released, or you can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening for a while and are wondering how you can help us out, there are a few ways. You can spread the word. So let your running buddies know about your favorite episode, share it with them, maybe listen to it together or with your significant other. And you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's really helpful if you listen to your podcasts there. If not, on Spotify, you can rate us out of 5 stars. 5 is great, but if we don't deserve 5, that's okay too, because we want this to be realistic.
Keep it real.
Alan wants to say something.
But give us 5 stars.
We're also on the platform Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy us a coffee, but you can also just go there and follow us as creators, and you'll get email notifications if we post something if you've followed us. That's it for from Running Book Reviews. Bye for now.
Bye.